Week 14, the final week of the best ball regular season. We find out how many teams we advance. Do we have a chance to win Best Ball Mania, the DraftKings Millie, and all that good stuff? We're sweating our teams. We're sweating our Saquon fades, our Rashee Rice injuries, and everything there in between. And today, myself, Erik Beimfohr, and my good friend Rob Coakley are going to break down everything Week 14 and the best ball playoffs and what we're thinking about heading into the best ball playoffs. Players we want, players we don't want, some teams we might have that are live, and all the good stuff. Let's do it. You know, Rob, it's been a minute since you and I have been able to do one of these shows together, and I have my volume up a little loud on the intro there. You know, you obviously don't realize it when you're the only one talking, or even if it's like you and I pre-show talking, and then click the button for the intro video, and I was like, oh my God, you know, I'm not quite used to it. The last time I talked on a StreamYard was yesterday with Kitchen and Davis, and maybe Davis is a little on the louder side, but Dave is a very soft-spoken, kind of guy. So it was a shocker to have the nice hype music, but it did get me kind of hyped for this final week of the best ball regular season.
Get you going. And I was probably perfectly pitched because I just bought a new $500 microphone. So, you know, that's why
I've been holding out on a new camera. My mic is fine. I'm happy with the microphone. I keep holding out on the new camera. We might need some successful best ball teams to afford an actual nice camera that doesn't get all fun. I have the lights and stuff. There's just something bad about my office here in the basement. I can't get the lighting right and everything, and so I despise using my camera or my my lighting setup or whatever.
Yeah.
But then the camera screws up. You know, it's a lose-lose, kind of like my best ball season ultimately.
Yeah. I have some stuff to do here too. I'm going to paint this wall behind me black, but nobody cares about that. What they care about is our best ball teams. And we've heard a lot of woeful stories over the course of this best ball season. But Erik, I'm going to be honest. Your advance rate looks pretty good. My advance rate looks pretty good. Neither of us drafted He Who Shall Not Be Named.
We found the new Voldemort, by the way.
And I have one team with Voldemort on it, and it is advancing, but my advance rate overall is above expectation, which is awesome. And I can't be in terms of not drafting that player and getting an above average advance rate through makes me feel even better about the playoffs.
So two quick things. One, I believe two teams across 1,500 and something, 1,535 or whatever it is. Across that many teams, I believe I have two Voldemort teams total, which is really funny. But I auto drafted him once in the DraftKings 555, right? And so I was pissed when it happened, and then the first couple of weeks happened, and you're like, thank God, maybe I can make up for this with one team. We are sitting in a fun, 7th place. I might have the worst Voldemort team in all of best ball in one of the highest priced tournaments. So, no, I really, no matter how the season goes, I'm sure you remember our conversations last year around this time. I mean, my advance rate was far worse than this. It's so interesting to see the sentiment around things over the course of the best ball season. Is a huge roller coaster, and I'm not knocking anybody for the Saquon stuff. It is what it is. It's frustrating when you don't have kind of the guy defining the fantasy season, and then nothing else seems right. It's one thing to have a guy who you didn't really draft break fantasy, and then another if Rashee Rice stays healthy, if Chris Godwin stays healthy, if a few little small things shake out a different way, you're like, yeah, that sucks, but it's not that big of a deal. You know what I mean? It's fine. But a lot of things all kind of came together to hurt that. But like I said, last year, I'll just give this. I've told it a million times, but for anybody that's new maybe and hasn't heard the story, I had a 12% advance rate last year. I had to log off social media and everything. What's going to be this coming Tuesday, because I knew it was just going to be a LOL can you imagine listening to Erik and the Spike Week guys? Everything he said was wrong. The one thing I got right was Sam Howell, kind of, and then he turned into a pumpkin down the stretch and started getting benched for Jacoby Brissett. So that failed as well. J.K. Dobbins got hurt in the first half. He was my highest exposure player, I think, last year, J.K. Dobbins on the Baltimore Ravens, and, tore his Achilles in the second quarter of week 1. So it was like, it was just destined to be a bad season last year. I advanced 12% of teams. I somehow scratched my way. I made the BBM finals. That's the kind of the main story I'm going to tell. I had 4 finals teams. Like I had a objectively terrible season from like a takes perspective and all that kind of stuff. And I got 4 teams to the best ball finals on far less volume than I drafted this year. So it'll probably swing the opposite way. I won't have as good of a season, but it's easy. It's simultaneously easy to be doom and gloom and say, crap, I don't have Saquon. I don't have Derrick Henry. I don't have Mixon. I don't have whatever. And it's over. And it's also simultaneously easy to be like, well, it only takes one, which is true, but also we don't want to cling to that. But there is this middle ground. And that's kind of what I'm trying to describe, that I had a bad year, but I think if we construct teams in such a way, which we talk about all summer, and then week 10, 11, 12, 13 hit, and everybody stops caring about, the reasons why we draft the way that we do over the course of the summer to be peaking at this time. And I finished, I ended up finishing 12th, but I was sitting in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th in BBM for much of the day and had a real shot to win it. If DK Metcalf and George Pickens they had 2, close touchdown calls that didn't go my way. I mean, I could win or get 2nd or 3rd in Best Ball Mania last year. Despite, if you looked at my exposures, they were all awful, absolutely horrid, other than Kyren Williams. And so it just takes, it really does just take one. And I think if you're listening to this, you're clearly a total sicko, that there's a lot of paths, some that we don't foresee right now, that are going to come to fruition, that are going to give you a shot at some really good teams. I don't really know who they're going to be. We're going to talk about some of our candidates, but there's going to be stuff that happens that makes teams you're like, turn into okay, now I really like this team.
Yeah. And I think my biggest lesson coming out of this season is just, if you are drafting in such a way, like if you're really emphasizing the way you're drafting via structures, like what type of lineups you're building, you can still fade the chalk without, for lack of a better word, and get enough teams through. And I mean, would you rather have a 30% advance rate with Saquon or a 25% advance rate without any Saquon teams? Right? I guess technically you're going to always say you want the 30%, but my 23, 24, 25% is going to be so different in those early pods, right? I mean, 50% advance rate for him right now. So you're probably, I can't remember, what is it, 16 people in the
16,
first round?
Yeah.
So 8 out of 16 teams most likely are going to have him at minimum in the general pod structure. So just being able to get away from him if he misses just week 15 in terms of like a high score.
Right.
Or he does what Josh Jacobs did last night, where Jacobs scored 3 touchdowns and he still didn't break 30, right? He still had like a 24-point game or something like that. Even if he just stays stable like that, I'll take my shots with those teams. Like I'd rather have a chance to get through. We saw this. It's not apples for apples, but Josh Jacobs 2 years ago when he was a 50%.
He didn't have quite the actual raw fantasy points that Saquon is having, but from an impact perspective,
right,
he was maybe even bigger than what Saquon is this year.
Yeah, he was a 50% player that got you through, and then he just dusted off in the playoffs. Now, do I expect that from Saquon completely? Of course not. Yeah. Right, but a game, 2 games could be huge, and then you're the one who has the leverage.
My favorite is everybody's like, oh, he plays Dallas in week 17, we're cooked. And theoretically that does make sense. You know what his worst game of the season was? Against Dallas. And I'm not expecting that, but I fully expect, right? If you told me to, hand up, right, gun to your head, what is Saquon doing down the stretch? It's what Saquon continues to do. Of course, that's the most likely indicator, but that is not how this shit works. It's just not. We don't have to Like it's just chaos and it's just variance. We can try to make it all sound like fun and rosy, or give you some crazy story about why he's not going to smash down the stretch. But the real answer is sometimes the best players don't score the most points. And
Yeah.
sometimes, you have the guy, you're the only guy in your pod with whatever, Jaden Reed, who's fresh on top of my mind off of freaking goose egg last night, right? But the guy you just don't. Nobody last year at this exact time would have ever given two shits other than the fact he was healthy about having Amari Cooper on best ball teams. You were like, it's fine. Like, I'm not, like, it's cool that Flacco's playing now, right? But like, nobody was like Amari Cooper best pick on the board. And then in week 16, if you didn't have Amari Cooper, the path to making the finals was quite thin, was really, really thin. George Pickens was the 1B version of that last year, also in the same week in week 16, where George Pickens was like fine, right? Like his quarterback got benched. Mason Rudolph is his starting quarterback. Pickens has not been particularly awesome all season. And then boom, 40 ball, right?
Yeah.
It's like this stuff happens and we can't foresee it. And I just want to have as many teams as I can, like everybody else, advancing with as many live bodies, right? Like Jalen McMillan is a guy we all kind of liked, and he got a run out and it looks awful. He can have a 100-yard and 2-touchdown game. No one's projecting it, but that shit happened. KJ Osborne. Remember the KJ
Yeah.
Osborne
KJ
week?
Osborne
KJ
game, week
Osborne,
15.
Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, like Tyquan Thornton, right? Like all these guys have these big games and you don't see it coming. And so that is just kind of like me probably talking to myself, quite reassuring myself, but also just like a thinking ahead. And you look at your teams, you can't just have like enough live bodies and enough bullets in the chamber, and you got a shot, man. Every
Yeah.
team has a shot.
And we talked about this a little bit on the lab on Wednesday, but you remember the KJ Osbornes and the Zay Jones and the Amari Cooper games because that's 25% of the season for best ball. We've only
Right.
played after this week, 25% of the season's done. We still got 75% of the season to come. We just 14 games count for 25%, and now one game counts for 25%. But you're not going to remember everything. If Saquon dusts off, you're not going to you'll be like, oh yeah, Saquon crushed and then just fell off the earth during the playoffs, and it's not going to matter. It's going to impact you the next not this week, but the next 3 weeks, 15, 16, 17 are going to be fresher in your minds when you're drafting teams come, February,
It's funny
March,
how that
April,
works.
May.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
We
So,
forget the regulars, like the regular season league winners are all we think about for 3 months. And then we forget the regular season league winners, and all we talk about is how could I have got was Mike Evans a good pick in the second round, right? Because he scores 50 in the final. It's like, it's funny how that changes, but I think that's the best descriptor like of this game is it's so unique, it's so chaotic, it's so playoff driven that no matter what has happened, no matter how we feel, no matter how these guys project necessarily in these weeks, it just like doesn't matter. Like it's hard to explain that, but like we're also, to your point, 25% of the season is the first 14 weeks, and then the last 3 quarters in individual weeks. But this is also the most chaotic part of the season. Obviously,
yep.
injuries have piled up, but not just injuries to our best ball players, injuries to offensive lines, injuries to defense. Anybody watch the Giants play of recently? Not only is everybody's like laughing about the offense, they lost Dexter Lawrence. They basically don't have a good defensive football player on the on the entire side of, I guess, Brian Burns, but he's just like a pass rusher and nobody gives a shit about passing against them. You want to play the Giants, right? And it's like at the beginning of the season, you were like, whatever. I want to play the Panthers, or I want to play Washington. Now it's like, I don't really want to play Washington. I want to play the Giants. Like the chaos is so crazy that we're gonna get these guys that pop up. I'm looking at my Bucky Irving teams like everybody else is looking at, but I mean, he's already banged up, right? Raheem Mostert last year at this time, where we're looking at like, oh my God, this dude's going to score 40 touchdowns. I want him on all of my teams. And guess who didn't play in week 17? And guess who you wanted / needed in week 17? His backup, Achan. And so all that shit's going to happen. All of that's going to happen. And for me, I don't know how you feel about this. This is specifically what makes best ball. So why do I love this? Why did we start a company around it? Why do we have a Discord that I talk in every single day about all this stupid shit? I find the playoff like little gauntlet and all of that the most. It's the greatest sweat ever. Get some teams through. Doesn't really matter how you feel about them. Anybody can win. Chaos is going to break through, and the strategy around all that, and particularly the sweat, is like unmatched. And you've sweated really high stakes, strong finishes in big poker tournaments and DFS tournaments, and right, everybody has. I've never found anything like kind of more fun than the best ball playoff sweat.
Yeah, I mean, what other format do you get to go into? Like, so come Wednesday, right? We'll probably get pod advancements. You
Well,
go in.
let's not put the cart in front of the horse.
I'm just, theoretically, you'll have pod
I
advancements
won't
on.
be able to find him in the app once
Oh
we
my
get him.
God.
But
Let's not.
we
Let's
love
not.
we love you, underdog. They'll get it going. But it was a
Yeah.
funny. It was a funny app update.
But when you get those, when you finally get to your pods and figure out how to get there after you hit the up, left, right, the Konami code to get
Yeah,
to it,
Konami code.
you get into your teams, you start looking at your pods, right? And you're like, all right, well, where are my leverage points? And that's what we're, I mean, I know that's what I'm going to do. I assume
Yeah.
if you're in here listening to this on YouTube or the podcast feed or whatever, you're going to be like, all right, here's my team with Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. Do I have leverage with this team right now in this particular pod? And you're going to start looking for those leverage points on especially the teams we all fall in love with certain teams, right? Like throughout the season, we start looking at them. We're like, man, we know we're going to lose in week 15, but we fall in love with them, and we want to kind of track the progress of that team. So I know I'll be doing it on Wednesday. I'm sure you'll be doing it. I'm sure people that are listening will be doing too. That's why it makes it such a fun sweat.
It's so fun. Like I was listening to shout out to Davis Maddock and Rich Rebar. They do their they do a sports betting like top 5 games against the spread on Fridays, and I really like listening to those guys talk about that. But Reeves, the absolute serial killer that he is not. He's like, I'm not going to check any of my. And Dave's like, when are you going to finally look at your best ball teams? He was like, when the season's over.
Yeah,
I'm like, that is psychotic,
psycho.
That is. I could. My fingers start twitching. Play 6 of week 1. You're like, oh shit, Mark Andrews isn't playing. I'm like, oh God, where are my likely teams, right? And like, it's stupid, it's foolish. We look back and we're like, yeah, who cares about likely? We want Andrews, but like the fun. I find that to be the fun, like going through and figuring out. Like it's kind of like a DFS slate, right? You're putting a puzzle to. I've already built the puzzle, but now I'm retroactively going back and figuring out which pieces are the most important. But on a DFS slate, I'm like, how do I put this puzzle together that gives me this path to win, right? Like everybody can put the optimal together, click a fucking button, right? It's not that's easy nowadays, or run a sim, right? Run an optimal. But figuring out the best path to, actually beating your opponents, and particularly when you're looking at teams that you drafted in May and it's Christmas, is like a really, really fun kind of, science experiment. And so I think it can give anybody hope. It's giving me hope, despite, tons of misses and tons of injuries like everybody else is dealing with. But you mentioned, kind of some of the leverage opportunities and some of you mentioned the lab. Also on Wednesdays that we do, if you are in the Discord, which there's a link, it is still currently free to the Spike Week Discord on Wednesdays for Discord members. We do what we call the lab. It's just like a hangout. We use Zoom, but we all just hang out and talk best ball and whatever comes up. Right? So we're going to the bar, we're hanging out, and sitting at the bar and talking best ball. It's kind of what's happening, but as opposed to us typing on our keyboards. Every week, essentially, we have brought up like what guy do you most want to have on teams advancing to the playoffs? And I do actually find this conversation both really fun to do just in general, but seeing the life cycle of everybody's takes on that, like ask that question every week and see the evolution of the answers go from this guy to this guy to this guy to this guy, right? And it changes, and it'll change by week 17. I'm curious who would top that list for you right now when you go to those teams, they get through this, Sunday and Monday. Who, like, what guys are you like most hoping to find?
Well, I mean, we start at our heavily exposed players, right? Because we want those. So for me, Bucky is one of my top exposed players. Zach Charbonnet is a top exposed player, hoping that he gets a week or two without Kenneth Walker, which he might, something like that. But guys that I'm just like heavily exposed to that I think people were more flatly exposed to. So Jaden Reed, we talked about him a little while ago. He got his 0 out of the way last night, right? I don't think they'll allow that to happen again. So a guy with that type of explosion who I'm getting through, I want for sure. I brought this up Wednesday night. I want, like, if I had one quarterback to get through to the finals right now that I think is going to be supreme leverage in week 17, if you get him through, is give me, and block your ears, but give me CJ Stroud with Nico Collins and some sort of Ravens bring back, because his run out this season has been putrid, first of all. So if you can sneak that team into week 17 against that, fake Ravens secondary,
Yep.
and you can you're probably going to get a 2-3 touchdown game. He's going to be less, owned than other players. I'm secretly, I think I have 2 Stroud Nico teams getting through right now. And I'm like, man, I kind of would dig getting one of those through to the finals and seeing if I can get that particular pairing in a small, we talk about it, a small DFS contest. If you can get leverage with the CJ Stroud against a bad secondary, that's what you want. So if I can do that, then I would love it.
And if Mixon does anything, Mixon gets really lost in the shuffle, disrespected. I guess I would say, like, Mixon, if Saquon was not doing, like, even if Saquon was having a good season, but maybe not quite the same, Voldemort was doing the Voldemort thing, but maybe just not quite to this level, we would be putting Joe Mixon right in that discussion as the why didn't we take more Joe Mixon? Luckily, at least for us here, we were not out on Joe Mixon. We were out on Saquon RIP, but I feel fine about taking a lot of my best teams have Joe Mixon. But to your point, if Joe Mixon is reasonably popular, that's actual what I would call leverage in the playoffs with Stroud and Nico. Tank to a much lesser degree, Dalton Schultz to a much lesser degree, Mechie, right? If you happen to have Mechie in the last, just the passing game is actual leverage that I could, like, now I'm not trying to say that the Eagles can't do this, because AJ Brown specifically can in just about any week, but the Eagles could not possibly be less interested in throwing the football. It's just, the defense is good and the run game works, so they don't care. You know what I mean? Like, I have a Jalen Hurts, Devonta Smith team getting through. Again, and I've been following a lot of the 555 on DraftKings. It's easier to sweat 20 high stakes teams instead of 1,500 total teams. But I'm like, I have Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith. It's advancing with good players, and I'm just like, do I really care? Like, is that really ever going to go totally nuclear? Maybe. It's certainly possible that I'm wrong about that. But the Texans are one where, look, it's been bad for CJ Stroud, but if things go their defense is not as good as the Eagles. We know the Ravens, as you said, are going to score on them, and the Texans are going to have to be aggressive. We know the Ravens can not shut down, but slow down Joe Mixon. Nico Collins is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, maybe top 3. So, like, you get that at low ownership, like, that's the dream. You know what I mean? Who knows how it will work out, but that's what we want. People that can not just be low owned and be leverage, but be like, have the mega ceiling. I think Jaden Reed is one of those guys. We haven't seen it in a long time, but after the first month, if you would have said you get loan Jaden Reed into the finals, you would be smitten. And so it's all of those guys, I think, Why Dad
Yeah,
brings up this is definitely one of my one. I thought you were going to say Baker. Actually,
Baker
as your
was a big
quarterback.
miss off for me. If I had more Baker, I would say that. It was we talked about this in the lab. I think Baker was one of my biggest misses of the entire season because it's not like I had a stance against him. I just didn't draft enough of him.
I genuinely like this comment from Consigliere. He's like half being serious, half trolling, but he says for the audio folks, why didn't we take more Saquon, Henry mixing Kamara? Because best ball should be fun and we shouldn't hate drafting. And it's funny because other people would say that sounds really fun.
Yeah.
Drafting those guys. And I don't. I like I believe in some methodologies and they're not always going to work every single season. Do I now sit here, right? Wish I had more of those guys? Sure, of course. But last year, would you have wished you had more of those early round? Hell no. You give me as much CD and as much Amon-Ra and as much, XYZ, maybe what Brees was the early round, but he was like fourth, fifth. He fell to like the 4-5 turn eventually. So he was mixing. Brees was mixing. Brees was not, second round, whatever, Saquon, like who, JT or whatever. Like, did you care that you had Jonathan Taylor last year? No, you did not want him. You probably couldn't even advance a JT team if you tried. So like, there is something to be said for like, yeah, let's draft the dudes you think are the most fun. If you were into Saquon, draft them. Like that's part of the point. We're drafting the guys that we most want to, everybody has a different definition of that, but the guys we most want to put into it. When we get to this part of the season, we shake all these dudes up and we start looking at these teams and you're like, who do I want to have on there? Right. I'm genuinely excited. We got, somebody mentioned, Min Cash Merchant. When I was talking earlier about the swings, he said, am I in the middle ground if I just swing back and forth between, instead of living in the middle? He was being very positive and very negative, every other second. To be fair, I was doing that too. No time more did I do that than the CMC straight into Jordan Mason news this week, where I was like, as somebody with 40% Jordan Mason, which is still, I'm still happy about that. I don't have any regrets, but it was so close. We were so close to being back. The boys are back in town. It's ready to rock. We got a late round running back that's going to come through finally this season. And then of course, Jordan Mason goes on IR, but that's how I felt there. But I'm also like, look, this is foolish. I know people will laugh or whatever, but James, I'm guessing, is Meat Gazer in the chat. Kendre Miller, the people like Kendre Miller. Doesn't have to be just Kendre Miller. Jonathan Brooks, some of those guys. Like, it's going to happen for some of these dudes. I don't know if it's going to be Kendre or Jonathan Brooks, but like these are this is why we drafted these guys.
Yeah.
Right now, down the stretch, them coming alive. It didn't go perfect, obviously, for either of those guys, but they're back at the right time, and the team situation went exactly as we expected for both of those teams. Disasters, really bad, and so that stuff's going to happen. And I get excited for some of those types of things.
Versier brings up the point I was going to bring up to you is he goes, Izzy could be him. And you think
what
back,
a backdoor.
You think back to these preseason best ball teams we were drafting where we all had 20 to 30% Izzy Abanikanda. And then I've never seen the wheels fall off of a wagon so fastly. And we're going to somehow backdoor into Izzy possibly getting carries for the 49ers and the fantasy playoffs. Like,
unbelievable.
That, like, you raise your eyebrow to that for someone that literally got shadow realmed. Like he was put in the box by the Jets for all eternity. So for him to have any like pulse at all is amazing for some of those big board teams that you're getting through.
Yeah, my big board teams are terrible. This is how bleak it was. We got the Jordan Mason news, and then they signed Izzy, right? So this is not a great mental health moment for me at that given time. Those 2 days or whatever it was, I'm looking through not big board teams, Rob, little board teams. So I believe that's like 10K to first, maybe even 20K to first. So we could be all right. We just need to win the little board. No big deal.
I have good news for you. A team that we drafted together is looking like it's going to advance in the big board.
Hey, there we go.
if you're shocked, it does have Izzy Abanikanda on it.
Hold on. We're going to share some Izzy Abanikanda teams. That's how you know it's a Spike Week show. We're not talking about the really good players. We're talking about Izzy Abanikanda. But I pulled up my little board teams. So, right, I'm not like trying to brag on this team because it's probably not going to win. But it is funny to look back on those, like, February teams, March teams, whatever it is, when this one was February 8th, dude. Oh God. Drafted this team. I just tried to print this. Drafted this team in February 8th. So Caleb, obviously still at USC at the time. Gino, take Michael Penix, which it's not over for Michael Penix, as crazy as that's. Like, Michael Penix showing up to week 17 against Washington and helping this team win would be hilarious. But Bijan, so you could tell I was much more on board with you at this given time in the season because I'm drafting Bijan. But Bijan ends up with Penix, right? Obviously, don't know, unplanned. Chase Brown, fun. Khalil Herbert handcuffing Chase Brown. Of course, my guy Kendre, Ray Davis, Abanikanda. Remember the Ronnie Rivers?
Rivers.
Remember the Ronnie Rivers? But end up with Caleb stacked with DJ Moore. Have Gino double stacked. I know Neighbors is hurt, and I'm not like excited for him. But Neighbors, McLaurin, Shakir, Roman Wilson sucks, but Yoshi, Brock Bowers, Njoku, like the team is like legit loaded and stacked. Every quarterback is stacked. It's like, that's like the fun part of this to me, going back through and being like, look at this ridiculous team that I drafted. And then now I get to root for Izzy Abanikanda's 6 touches or whatever he gets on Sunday.
You'd hope that he gets through. Yeah, the big board teams are always fun to go back and look through because there are just some names on there that you're like
Charlie Jones.
Yeah, like what was this thought process? I mean, I know what it was, but
yeah,
geez.
It feels real bad.
It feels real bad.
You know why you did it, but you look back and you're like, I know what I was thinking then, but maybe let's not think that again moving forward.
Sometimes we're thinking too many things when we're drafting big board teams. We're a little too pie in the sky.
I was very into Roman Wilson in the little board, and I'm still not convinced he's a real person. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like him and Tez Walker are riding unicorns into space somewhere, because I've never had any confirmation that either actually exists.
No.
Tyler Wallace.
They keep telling me they're inactive, but I'm pretty sure that's just a lie. Like, they're buried somewhere underneath the stadium or something.
They just throw their jersey on a scarecrow somewhere that's just sitting there.
They're on the the sleds that the linemen push. They just put Roman Wilson's jersey on one of the sleds, and they're like, "See, he's just not ready to play. He's
real. We promised.
He was limited in practice.
Yeah, limited to getting pushed back.
Right.
Yeah, so these teams are fun. We get excited for this stuff. I am personally excited because I have $200 Dalmatian teams that are advancing. I only drafted 2 of them, so those are going to be fun to sweat. The high stakes stuff is always fun to sweat.
Yeah.
When we get to this point, and one of those is a Puka team, which is pretty fun that we get that through. I can actually share that. I have those pulled up right now.
Go for it.
Let's show some Dalmatian teams, and then I'm going to move you over here. So not only are they advancing, they're advancing by quite a bit.
There. Zoom in a little.
Yeah. So
beautiful.
First one is a Lamar Will Levis team.
That's fun. Levis is coming to life.
Yeah, he's actually been looking pretty good in terms of fantasy. It's got Bijan, of course, Ramondre, Chase Brown, RIP to Marshawn Lloyd, Jaleel McLaughlin.
McLaughlin showing a little bit of life. Tank is back. That's nice.
It's a Nico Zay Flowers team. So we get that week 17 Lamar correlation there.
Oh, the Lamar side. Okay.
Yeah.
Lamar, Zay, Nico.
Yep.
Buddy. Okay.
Calvin stacked up with his quarterback, JSN, RIP to Rashid Shaheed, but it's got Josh Downs. Another Roman Wilson sighting.
Okay. Somebody is bugging us around here, putting Roman Wilson on every team we're trying to share. We need to find some non-Roman Wilson teams.
But it's got Mark Andrews too, so it's a full Baltimore stack. Yeah, so it's going to be a fun one to have through here.
How many points is it ahead? Oh, okay, it's easy.
Plus 157.
I was just gonna say, like, do you need anything from
No,
Levis to get through this week? But no,
no, they can all take the week off.
yeah,
the
they
other
probably
one,
should.
the other one's a little more interesting. I like the first one slightly better, but this one is a little more intriguing. This is a Richardson Burrow team with Aaron Jones, Pollard, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Bucky Irving. So the running back room is pretty solid. Burrow's had a hell of a year. Richardson's not getting benched again unless he's hurt. But it's also the Puka Marvin Harrison combo there
Yeah, love it.
with T. Higgins, Leggett, Bateman, Demario Douglas, Tez Walker, as we were talking about.
There's got to be a shadow run. There's got to be a fake player, a Madden creative player on every one of these teams. Yeah.
I got Alec Pierce, though, who was
That's
a
nice.
last pick, and the tight ends are
great last pick to have for sure.
Yeah, and it's got Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid, so the tight end room is at least established too. So those are going to be fun to sweat in the Dalmatian. I'm excited for both of these teams. So,
you mentioned Nico, and I was looking up a little bit of Nico, and I sadly don't have much Nico that I'm loving getting through really across the board. But what's interesting is when you start to look through teams and you see like a trend of guys you would never ever expect. So, for instance, anybody that played the Eliminator, right, on Underdog, which is an awesome. I have two teams left. One is stone dead. Like, yeah. I think I can field a starting lineup, but like that's it. And like one of them is Mike Williams and Yoshi and like Ben Sinnott's on bye. It's dead, right? It's over for that team. I might score like 35 points or whatever. The other team is like quite live, but even last week I had like 5 teams left or something, and 4 had Marvin Harrison. 1-2 turn Marvin Harrison, and it was like how exactly, like everybody's like dunking on Marv as a bad pick, and I'm like, maybe he was, but my team sure seemed to do just fine with Marv, and I've seen a lot more Marv show up on some of my stuff than I would have thought, because I didn't take like a big stand on. I mean, I drafted him. I'm a little overweight because that's just the early wide receivers, but I don't have anything crazy with him. I think he's paired with mostly a little more Nico and who did you just have on that team? No, you had London. A lot of London, and then Puka, of course. So it's kind of just like they didn't totally suck and they stayed healthy. So they're on teams that are being carried. But was there anybody that you noticed you're just like, man, I keep looking at these teams and not Roman Wilson? The early to mid-ish guys, we were like, that guy keeps showing up and that guy keeps showing up, and like maybe that wasn't, it's not Saquon and it's not, Mixon and those kind of guys.
No, what I did the other day was, and I didn't write it down, but I was kind of going through and just checking my advance rate versus first round players. And that's sort of an interesting exercise as well, because all of us draft differently. And obviously my big stance in the first round this year was I was fading CMC and Tyreek Hill. So you can just throw those guys out, even though I have the one CMC team that's advancing, which is
RIP to that one. That was a good team, man.
I don't know, man. I'm not.
It's not over.
Waving the white flag on it. It crushed without him. I think it still has an opportunity to do something, but you start looking at it, and so CMC will bypass him. I obviously have a lot of Jamar Chase teams that are advancing. I have some Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra. I was a little middle of the field. I have a ton of Bijan teams advancing because I was way overweight on him. But any Breece Hall teams that I drafted are basically dead, right? They didn't do anything. I have a couple Garrett Wilson teams that are getting through. I have no Puka teams that are advancing in anything other than some of the higher stake stuff. So you start looking through it that aspect, and I make that point to make this point. Some of the more fun teams that I saw that were getting through were the thing that I was kind of preaching in the offseason. This isn't me getting on my high horse, but when you could pull up a Nico Collins and pair him with Drake London or something like that towards the end of the first round and get some of those unique combinations and get them through, I feel is very advantageous this year because a lot of people that are advancing from that area had the Saquon Barkley, right? So even if you did it with him, even though there's 50% advance rate on that guy, if you pulled up Drake London, I guarantee like the Drake London Saquon pairing is a little less common than some of the other ones.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
you know what I mean? So like if you were even doing it with the mixture of those guys, your teams are, I would say, are a little bit stronger for it. So it was fun seeing those teams. I obviously not for me with Saquon, but like Drake London, Nico Collins getting mixed in with a lot of those guys around there was what I was doing. So those were the ones that I thought were a little more fun to look at.
I like that. I like this comment also from Andrew, another version of kind of what we're talking about, the guys you want to see, blah blah blah. Who so the original question for anybody just joining or whatever, who do you want to see on teams that are advancing to the playoffs or might advance to the playoffs? And we can continue to talk. It's a fun I like shooting the shit on some of those players. We can talk about some more of those, but adding another one saying, what player do you want advancing on teams that is not a player that you took a stand on? Maybe you have less than 5% of that player that you actually want to see on teams. And again, set aside like everybody wants to see Saquon, right? We get it. Everybody, and I don't know if everybody wants to see Derrick Henry, but like a couple of the big guys. I was just trying to look at a couple of teams super quickly. My difficult thing is I don't have a lot of like I'm kind of a 0 or like at the field or above the field. I'm not a huge like, oh, I have 2% of that guy type of a drafter, but I kind of mentioned him already. Joe Mixon, for me, that he's definitely not going to be like a low advance rate player, but he's been the buoy to a lot of my like 0 running back ish teams, or like call it, he would be like the hero running back onto like my best, one of my best like higher stakes DK teams. He's just really been carrying it, and we almost got Mason back in that, buddy. We were about to be cooking on that team, but I just been kind of hanging on for dear life. But there's Tank and Chuba and some of those guys on that team that can come to life. And Joe Mixon is one of the very few times where I'm not overweight Joe Mixon, but I feel like I did a better job than I sometimes most of the time do, quite frankly, about not being stubborn on like, you love Trey McBride at this price, or you love Lamar Jackson, or you draft wide receivers here. And it's like, sure, I do plenty of the time, but Joe Mixon was like, man, like we're really doing 5th round, like we love all the Texans this much. 4 Texans go in the first, 4 or 5 rounds in the passing game. And Joe Mixon is going in the 5th round or whatever. Like it was one of those where I at least was able to identify, like you said, I don't have it pulled up in front of me just yet, how many Mixon teams, but he's been absolutely huge. All formats. My eliminator teams have him. A lot of my best teams have him. And I like that kind of a guy because while he's been really important to the teams to get them there, the price was not such that like a Saquon, like a Brees, like a whatever, to where it's like, oh no, like if Mixon doesn't go for 30 in all of these playoff rounds, like I'm totally cooked. Like you can kind of thread the needle a little bit more as the price decreases on some of these guys that are really impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add an asterisk to what I was talking about,
Baby.
I looked up the Barkley London teams, and of all the like, what is there, 65,000 of each player drafted,
Yeah.
only 254 people paired Barkley with Drake London.
254. Jesus.
Yeah, and 45% are advancing at the moment.
0.3% or what is that the math?
Yeah, I think
basically nobody, right? 254 out of 60,000, whatever.
And how easy was it to do? So easy.
Completely easy. Yeah.
So when you start getting those little bit of pairings like that, and that shows the effect of ADP anchoring, right? Like you're just so anchored to ADP, especially in those early draft spots, that you're just so scared, be like, well, if I don't take Puka now, I'll never be able to take him, or Marvin Harrison now, I can't take him. So being able to open up and take a London, oh no, over Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm
How
not
dare
supposed to do
you?
this.
How
You,
dare you?
you can get some of those pairings like that. And if you get that team through, it looks like you're not going to have many of those pairings in your pod. I mean, maybe one here or there, but most likely it's going to be somewhere else. So
News rolling in. We are, of course, recording this on a Friday, early afternoon on a Friday. So if you're listening to this and we say anything foolish, I know Malik Neighbors did not practice today. Jamar Chase is questionable. Brees Hall is doubtful, et cetera, et cetera. If we say anything about any of those guys, because I'm not going to speak about Malik Neighbors because I need him very badly, and it's bleak. I'm not hopeful for any of those Malik Neighbors teams, but I have a lot of them. It would be sweet if he would play.
Malik Neighbors.
Malik. It is
Malik Neighbors.
Malik Neighbors. Yes, that is for sure. Anybody else on the on Andrew's question around guys maybe you didn't draft a ton of, but that stand out to you as either you've seen them on teams or you would like to have them on teams?
Yeah, so we've talked about this again. This is just an advertisement for the lab because we do go through a lot of these in the lab. But there were guys. I mean, the Kamara one's been talked about to death, so I don't need to bring him up because that's an obvious one. Montgomery was someone that we could have been doing so much of the stuff that we like with that guy. And it's not that I didn't draft him, but he was just always kind of a guy that's their guy, right? Because he was just a little more expensive than that little what we considered the sweet spot of the zero RB. So you always felt like pushing one more round. And I think that he was an eye opener that maybe instead of just worrying about pushing that one more round, just take that sometimes. Doesn't have to be. I mean, clearly I would love to have 20% Montgomery, but I'm just saying you could make sure that you're grabbing that guy and still do things that you want to do. Especially when there's that sweet spot of guys that we didn't really love, but we were just drafting to draft, like Zamir White. I mean, I personally faded him, but he was there and getting drafted. Zach Moss, like stuff like that. Like it wasn't that much more money to grab David Montgomery on what we considered one of the best offenses in the league. We know they're run heavy. We know what his workload is going to be. His role is defined. We knew all this stuff, and we just kind of were like, we'll kick the can a little bit more. Maybe when you can identify those particular spots, the Kamaras, the Montgomerys, it feels obvious now looking back. But in the moment we were kicking the can and trying to establish. I mean, you came across this when you were doing the show with Gretsch on the Eliminator.
Thank God I did that show to get a little more Montgomery because I wouldn't have.
Right. And sometimes you just need that little kick. And I think that we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to identify every single spot. But that was a glaring one that I will say that I wish I exploited a little bit more than I did in all formats. I mean, Eliminator for sure, but all formats, I wish I had more Montgomery, and it felt like bad process not getting more of him on my part.
Totally agree. We learned, for anybody that didn't listen to we did an Eliminator show, myself and Ben Gretsch, and we basically started stumbling upon like the who are some of the best like types of players in the Eliminator, meaning we still really need upside in the Eliminator, but we also would like to not just be only be contingent value and no stable floor, no ability to score points without something chaos breaking. And the guy we like figured out basically through some just riffing was like Dave Montgomery feels like perfect for that. You know what I mean? Like gonna score points because he's on the Lions, right? He's gonna score touchdowns, he's gonna get the ball, blah blah blah. But like even if Gibbs like takes over a little bit more, you're getting something from David Montgomery. And if something happens to Jahmyr Gibbs, would you like David Montgomery on your team? Yeah. I think we all would like David Montgomery. And so it was at that moment where I was like, that makes so much sense for the Eliminator. And I was like, but that works like on every team. I'm like, wouldn't you? That just means he's a great pick.
Yeah.
Like that, he was a phenomenal pick, and I fell into the trap of that. I got to get better at, and I think we keep getting better at. But the idea of well, two a kind of a combination. One that like I don't love the price, right? The argument that people always use, myself included, like, well, I can get James Conner 2 rounds later. I can get Chase Brown. I can get, Rico Dowdle. I can get like I can get a starting running back. I can get RIP Devin Singletary, right? Like I can get guys later that are like close enough, right? It's the same thing. And like maybe he goes next to a receiver or quarterback or whatever that I like. And it's like, that's fine if you're doing one draft. Totally, totally fine. It's fine to help dictate your exposures. But should you never, ever, ever draft a clearly good, like, if we just said he's like the best pick in all of Eliminator, he's clearly a good pick in any of these formats. You shouldn't have 2% of that guy just because you're like, man, if he were around cheaper, I would really hammer him. It's like, that's so stupid. Like, he's okay. So you go to the store and you need something, and you're like, buddy, I'm craving some pizza. And that shitty frozen pizza that you really want, right, is $7 and not $6. Nah, I'm out, right? I'm gonna go get some ramen. We're gonna go get some ramen for dinner tonight. It's like, it was $1, dude. Like, go outside and search for some change and like go get, like, it's fine. It's like, you don't have to shove all in on that guy, but you really like, I definitely got to keep getting better at that. I think it's a little bit of human nature too. You fall into the traps of like, I draft, certain positions at certain times of the draft and all that kind of stuff. And shaking that, I think, is a big deal. I just talked about doing it with Mixon and Montgomery. Everybody talks about Saquon. Everybody talks about Henry and all these guys. My single biggest regret of the whole summer is Dave Montgomery, and it's not really close. Saquon is what it is. Dave Montgomery could have taken my season completely over the top. Like, if I was smarter about Dave Montgomery, I could be sitting here right now like, no, buddy, I feel real good about a lot of teams, as opposed to like, I got a few I like.
Yeah, and the other part of this whole thing was I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's one of the most exciting players in the NFL, but I thought his role wasn't justifiable for the first round pick. So I was mostly
Right.
fading him. And now I'm not correlating that bet by not taking David Montgomery, right? And again, it doesn't have to be overweight. And I think this is something I did wrong a few times. And we had this discussion when I was fading CMC. And when the Jordan Mason news broke, I didn't take as much of him as I should have. And with that CMC fade, I should definitely have been I should have been slightly overweight on Elijah Mitchell. I should have slightly been overweight on Jordan Mason, right? Like, these are guys that I should have had a little bit more of throughout the draft cycle, and making sure that because I did it with Tyreek, where my Tyreek fade was my correlation bet was to be overweight Achane. So that was how that was my correlation bet there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's certain circumstances that I haven't done a great job of that in the past. I've done it well in some situations, but being cognizant of it. And I don't feel like I was cognizant of it at all with David Montgomery. I don't even know if that thought process came through my head once in the offseason. So trying to weigh that when I have such a stance on Gibbs, the ripple effects of that. Was just looking downstream. What is the downstream? Because I'm also sort of fading Amon-Ra, not completely. I was trying to be like around 8% on him.
Mm-hmm.
So like, this is a great offense. How do I want to attack it? The answer should have been to have, maybe a flat exposure to Montgomery. I don't think I could have talked myself into being over 10% or 12% of them at the time, but I could have talked myself into that 10% and maybe having some JMO and stuff like that. That's how I probably should have played it, but I didn't think through it enough was probably my problem there.
I think that's again, like my biggest thing. Out of all the stuff, there's plenty of things we can learn from in any individual year, but is trying to shake the kind of lazy human nature part of it, where, right, everybody, you get in BBM and DraftKings and drafters, everybody drops, late April, early May, and you're like, all right, let's get in there. Let's start ripping drafts. And even though I think we've all gotten a lot better about like handling the process of kind of changing takes and like not getting anchored to your early May takes and all that kind of stuff, there's still some little bit of like, once I figured out what I believe, just failing, right, but what I believe to be the edge in this zero running back landscape, which I still believe in, is just it's not hitting in a very good way this year. But then it was like it became so rigid, which really pisses me off that I did, because I kind of try to pride myself in the like, let's analyze all aspects of all of these different things and not make anything super binary. But you're human, right? And like we joke, like I'm drafting and cooking dinner, right? We're drafting on stream and we're drinking and shooting the shit, or we're eating fucking hot dogs, or like we're doing other stuff. I'm walking the dog and I'm drafting, and you just get in the rhythm of like, well, it's the late sixth. Like I have Chase, I take Burrow, right? It's just what I do, right? Like you're just in the rhythm of doing that thing. And sometimes it takes kind of a monumental event to go back and be like, why do I have 0 David Montgomery teams again? Like you're a zero. I know he's not technically a zero running back, right? Target, but it's like basically by zero running back principles, maybe not by ADP, but by principles he is. And you're doing it for Mixon. And I eventually started doing it for Ken Walker. And which I'm happy. I'm glad I did that. But it was like, yeah, but so you did it right in these other spots. Why did you have that blind spot, for this other situation? I just want to keep trying to hammer home, like make sure you don't kind of have those blind spots, basically.
Yeah. I mean, again, you're going to learn more every year. You're going to make mistakes every year because you're drafting 500, between 200 and 1,000 teams for most people that are doing best ball, right? So you can't make 200 to 1,000 perfect teams, but what you can do as you're checking your portfolios and stuff, it's like, do I have blind spots? What is a weakness that I have going on? What am I doing right? But is there a correlation between doing something right and missing something else? So these are all things that you have to think about. Just because you're doing something right doesn't mean that there's not a correlation aspect that you're doing something else wrong. So just trying to think through every single, outcome, which is impossible because we're talking about, infinite combinations of players. But but you should still go through the process. Is at the end of the day, you should still be going through problems. It's a problem. You're problem solving.
Right.
Go through your problem solving process of your teams. Be fair to yourself, but be harsh at the same time. You don't just want to like pat yourself on the back, which I do think is what a lot of people tend to do. Not everybody, but people tend to be like, well, I'm doing this right, this right, this right. And they don't look at what they're doing wrong because they just want to be like, this feels right. So make sure you're going through that full problem.
It's a really
process.
difficult balance, right? To self-evaluate essentially, because you want to make sure you're not giving yourself a pass for mistakes, which is kind of human nature to be like, well, I just ran bad, right?
Yeah.
Like how many times you have you play, like, again, you play a poker term. I played that hand perfect. Oops, ran bad. And it's true sometimes, but also it's not true. So sometimes, same thing, right? Me playing more DFS, it's like, I had one of the best first months of the season I've ever had this year in the NFL. And it's just been truly brutal for 2 months ever since. It's easy for me to say, well, now that's 8 weeks of running. I ran good for 4 weeks. I'm playing the same. And it's like, well, are you though? And like actually self-evaluate. And it's very hard to do in best ball because it's so, you can explain away fucking anything in best ball, right? Chris Godwin and Rushy Rice, good process, bad result. Saquon Barkley, I stand by my Saquon Barkley fade because of XYZ. And someone will come tell you you're an idiot, and you'll be like, because nothing is like binary, and the results are so chaotic that we would have to play this. We get to play one slate a year. All of us are going to get to play best ball for not that many slates in our entire lives. And so you're just never going to know what actually was the best route. People can create as many spreadsheets as they want. We don't know what the optimal way to draft is, even once we've had the results to a given slate. So you have to, like you said, be fair to yourself and give yourself, some credit for the process that you did have. But you also have to be willing to admit when you maybe were wrong a little bit. And I think people do it too much straight up results based, where they're going to beat themselves up about Saquon if they didn't draft Saquon. And they're not going to beat themselves up if they didn't draft Chris Godwin this year. And they were both the same mistake. It was results wise, it was the same mistake. You just got lucky that you didn't draft Chris Godwin this year because he got hurt. And Saquon Barkley did not get hurt. And it's like, we got to be able to find some way to self-evaluate that like makes sense and isn't just like, well, didn't draft Saquon. Who didn't see this coming? This was easy. We knew he was going to have 3 70-yard touchdowns every single week, right? Like,
Yeah.
like obviously you didn't. Like, he's awesome, and this is a great run out, and he's a good football player. It happens, but we got to find some middle ground, and that's what we try to do here. We'll spend the next however many months trying to like I said, I'm beating myself up about David Montgomery. Like,
Yeah.
if I had to pick one mistake, I'm just like, it could be so good right now, and you screwed up that one thing. It's not Saquon. It's not, right. It's not drafting Chris Godwin. It's not Kendre Miller, which people were right LOLing over the summer. Like, I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is some of these little things that other people would perceive to be not big deals.
Yeah. So you bring up poker, and I will give an analogy, as we often do on these shows. But when you go to a poker tournament and it's a place that you might know some other players, certain players, most players will walk up to you and be like, "I just took such a bad beat, you'll never believe it. Like, I had aces and I lost to the guy with 4 or 5 suited. Can you believe it?" And this is how you know if you're going through the process right. So what I used to do when I used to entertain these things, I'd be like, "Oh, who had position? Like, were you in position? Was he? What was the opening raise? Was it 2.5x? Did he repop you? Did he smooth from the button? What was the action on the flop? What was the board texture? What was this? What was that?" So, like, going through all the variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these players will just be like, "I don't remember who had position. I don't remember what the bets were. I just lost with aces." Right? And that's their thought process. It's level 1 thinking. They had the best hand, they had the best team in May. They had the best team in June. They didn't go through the flop in August, September. They didn't go through the turn in October, November. They didn't get to the river in December, January, right? Like, that's not their thought process. Their thought process is level 1 thinking. It's like, okay, well, I lost with aces. Well, but why did I lose with aces? Was there something that I could have done better when I had these aces? And could I have made a different approach to, was there a 3-bet that I missed? Was there a 4-bet? Was there a smooth? Like, what should I have done differently in the spot? What was my process? How can you're going to lose sometimes. You're just going to lose sometimes. Was that the case? Did you play it the best you could with the information that you had at the time, with everything around you? And that's what we need to do as best ball players is, well, I had a great team because I had Saquon. Well, how did you build that Saquon team?
Right.
You had aces, right?
You
But
can
how
have
did you
Saquon
build it?
teams crushing that are dead
Yeah,
in the playoffs.
absolutely dead. How were those teams built? How did you construct them? Did you build them the way that everyone else built them? Like, and I'm not saying you did or didn't. I'm just saying, once you hit the aces, what did you do with the rest of the hand? Right. And that's kind of the way I've been looking through this season as well. Some of my misses, but how am I constructing my teams? And is there edges that we're missing? I think there is. We've talked about these
Always will be.
numerous. There always will be. And I think a guy like Saquon, like, do I wish I drafted him more? Of course. Who doesn't? Who doesn't wish they had more Saquon teams? But when I think about it, I look at it, that CMAC team that I have, that will be in my head for all of next season because I made it a certain way. And I'm like, well, when I'm drafting these guys that I'm not drafting much, what am I going to do with them? So, like, if I was drafting Saquon this year, I would have made it a point to really try to differentiate the Saquon teams that I was making. And for those of you that don't know, as soon as I autoed CMC in one of my drafts, I made it a point. It became a 4 running back team. It's C-Mac, Achane, Kyron, Chase
Yep.
Brown, right? And then it was like I wanted a lead quarterback. I went Lamar, and then I just was very specific about the way I drafted wide receivers, and the wide receiver room is like relatively really live.
For no wide receivers in the first, one wide receiver in the first 5 rounds, the wide receiver room's really good.
Yeah, it's a really good. I mean, and it's good run out, right? Like I just like had got lucky overall, but there was a thought process behind
But you
every
created
single pick on that team.
you created a lot of the luck through the strategy that you put into place, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't just say I have the best hand, I got the 101, or I autoed CMC, right? I didn't get aces and just assume I was going to win. I still got to play the hand out. And how do I strategically put this team into place that could give me a shot to do it? And that's it, right? That's the whole game. This is definitely true. And I think this is and then I want to look at some more teams and talk about some more of these players. But FK Cooler is like the bad, I ran so bad, right? I lost with the aces,
Yeah.
or I had this guy and he got right. I had Mostert last year and he got hurt before week 17. I had this. It's like, yeah, but you often forget about, like, if you drafted a ton of a really good pick or something happened to shake out your way in the playoffs, you forget the fact that, but like you faded Chris Godwin, buddy. And like you ran real pure.
Yeah.
Like that dude was setting the world on fire as a 5th, 6th round wide receiver. And, like, obviously I'm not saying that that's a real example, but like that kind of shit happens is like, I ran so bad. My guy got hurt. It's like, yeah, but you faded 8th round Rushy Rice. Like, was your process really, really that good? Like Mahomes blew up his knee. Like, there's just so much of that. And again, that's like the kind of the point of the conversation is diving into how, like, what our process is kind of really doing essentially, and what, like, how much of the results. I try not even to really look that much at the results in terms of the process. I like to just look at like fantasy point results. I don't mean like how the season played out, but like he said, David Montgomery's like, why are these guys, like, somebody's probably listening, why the fuck is he so mad about David Montgomery? It's just because, like, when you see how this has played out, it was like, this was like 95. Like, it's so rare that like the outcome that everybody is expecting is like, yeah, like this is it. This was like, people joke about like, oh, we knew Saquon was going to happen, right? He's on the Eagles now, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I literally knew David Montgomery was going to do this. It's like, he's not setting the world on fire, but how valuable is that guy? So insanely valuable. And like, Gibbs is not infallible. It, like, something could, like, week 17, you show up and you have D-Mont without Gibbs against the shitty ass 49ers, like, there was just, it was so clear and obvious that when that happens, I want to learn from that kind of result, right? And the usage and those kinds of things, combined with ADP and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So 2 parts on this Nolan thing that he has in the chat. So he says, I think it's also important to look at teams you even did advance, which I completely agree with. You should be looking at the teams you advance as well, because you need to look at your construction. What I don't agree with what he's saying is, if you advance the CMC team, your roster construction was probably weird as hell and you need to adjust.
It's possible, but I wouldn't make that assumption.
I wouldn't make that a standard rule. And I'm just going to bring the team up. We won't go through it for too long. We will go through this CMC team that I have here, because I am actually going to draft more of these teams next year. Is something that I'm going to be doing.
So sick.
So
for anyone, I'm calling you out because it's funny. We do the lab every Wednesday. Sometimes it goes for an hour and a half. Sometimes it goes for 3 hours. This one went for 3 hours because Rob was stroking it to this team for about two and a half. I'm obviously being silly, but we did use this as a springboard to a lot of conversation, and the team is like sick.
So again, I was fading Christian McCaffrey all offseason in all formats. This team accidentally autoed it at either the 102. Yeah. And as soon as it happened, I was like, I was mortified, because I'm like, I'm not supposed to have any of him. Specifically,
isn't that the worst? Especially
isn't that
the worst though?
Yeah.
like when you, especially when you're like creating content and you're being public about all your exposures and all that kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
I'm literally telling it, and like for me, especially like creating rankings, and people are like, you have Derrick Henry ranked in the 50s or whatever. Why do you have 2 Derrick Henry teams? It's like, well, I fucking autoed it. Okay. Like
Yeah.
I'm human. It does happen. DraftKings notifications come in about 12 seconds late every single goddamn time. And, it happens. And so I do have some Saquon and Derrick Henry and CMC. I have teams of those. You get so mad.
Yeah.
But like then like, you did the perfect thing. Like, damn it. This is not supposed to happen. Now, how do I make this? How do I give this some juice?
Yeah. And the point, as soon as it happened, I'm like, all right, I want to think like a Christian McCaffrey drafter, and then I want to do the complete opposite thing. Like I want to make a team, and we always talk about betting like you're right on a player. So if I'm right on Christian McCaffrey coming in and lighting the world on fire, my running back room doesn't need to be like, 5, 6, 7 players deep. I need 4. And I'm like, well, how do I want to do the 4? And I was like, well, McCaffrey drafters probably aren't pairing him with Achan too much. And then we're going to also take Kyron because I feel like that is such a weird 3 for people to start with. So that's how we did 1, 2, 3. We grabbed Lamar Jackson. We also grabbed, we went to Jaden Reed, I think, in the 5th. And then so we went through the quarterback, which was Lamar. The other quarterback we ended up grabbing later was Jordan Love. We talked about the 4 running backs right there. And then it was Jaden Reed. And I just kind of tried to bounce between who are guys that can help me get this team through and who are guys that give me absolute upside. So Reed, absolute upside. Hopkins at the time on Tennessee, I thought could be a guy that could just like help me get through. We went Lad McConkey, Josh Downs, Ricky Pearsall, Quentin Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Pop Douglas, Luke McCaffrey, Greg Dortch, Brock Bowers, Jonnu Smith.
So good.
So overall, I mean, there's still misses on the team, right? Like here and there. But overall, each pick mattered on this team. And I remember being locked in for each pick. And we should be doing that with all of our teams. We're never going to because there's not enough time in the day. But when I'm building these type of teams, which I want to do more of next year, 4 running backs, 2 early, 2 mid-range sometimes. I don't think it has to be rounds 1 through 3. It just happened to be this particular team. I did draft more of these type of teams after. I have more advancing. But drafting in very specific ways when you're taking guys like a Christian McCaffrey, if your idea is to be 8% Christian McCaffrey, how can your teams be constructed slightly different than everybody else's? Because a guy at the 101, especially the 102, those teams are starting off the same for the most part.
Yep.
Like it was McCaffrey. Let's either grab Derrick Henry and, wide receiver X.
A lot of neighbors there,
Evans,
Devonta Smith, Evans. Yep.
So I think that being very deliberate about finding certain players that I want to have that baseline exposure to and creating teams that I think are going to relatively be unique to the field on. So if it's McCaffrey, it's not going to be next year, but like the 101, like whoever, or the 102, the 103, guys like that, just building them out a little bit differently.
Totally. So Min Cash Merchant was wondering how many people had that. We have our tournament DB, and I plugged in just in best ball mania, but you can see on Underdog, I know this pop-up isn't showing, but if you can also see in the marathon and in weekly winners, and then in all the drafters tournaments, you can see the different, how many times people drafted, right, other players with that player. And so just the CMC Achan start is what I plugged in. And if we look at Kyron, so 408 times CMC Achan Kyron out of 6, what did we say it was, 60 something
60 something
thousand or whatever. I just want to look around that. So here's Kyron, so 7%. So Olave, but you see here, like my Neighbors with that combo.
Yeah.
Neighbors is double, right? Achan is the same. Devontae, Mike Evans is more than double.
Right.
So you see, like you said, people are, and then like maybe they're doing Devontae, but if you look at all the wide receivers and we kind of combine all these wide receivers, nobody is really, by the way, 179 CMC, Achane, Saquon teams. Those teams were feeling frothy there for a hot minute until CMC went down. But it was like you see all the orange and the red, right? It's like, well, they took. Isn't this kind of crazy? Oh, I guess Rasheed was so much cheaper.
Yeah.
But like, and then look, they're taking Terry, right? So Lamar's not like super unique there, but what did you do, Jaden Reed?
Yeah.
Right. The next thing you know, through 5 rounds, it's like, cool, we're good. Like, I don't give a shit what I do the rest of the way because I just made tiny little pivots when everybody else is doing Neighbors, Evans, Waddle, right? Ayuk, everybody else is doing these wide receivers because they don't want to take three running backs to start. And I don't either, but it doesn't mean it's not a really, really viable way to build this team. And then you extrapolate the like structure edge, like you just talked about, where like, all right, when they do, they're still going to take 5 or 6 of these guys because people can't help it, right? With the running back thing. So like, I'm going to build it in a really, really smart, really smart way. Before we just dive into a couple of other players, Raymond, thank you for joining us. But nobody's ignoring. You're just sharing all your exposures.
Well, he's also 20 minutes behind the stream. That's the other problem is he's commenting on stuff from 20 minutes ago. So
yeah,
that's
we appreciate you. We love you. Thank you for joining. But you were just like sharing all of your advance rates and exposures. I don't know, like I don't have anything insightful to say. I can't see your teams or anything. So, but we appreciate you. This just made me laugh. Yeah, we won't be ignoring Raymond. Maybe not. Maybe we won't. The best ball community is on notice. But yeah, Ray, you got some sick advance rates. I hope we will see you next week and we can talk about some of your playoff teams. I just want to just quickly before we get out of here run down a couple of like let's just look up a couple of players or whatever on either of our teams and just kind of see. I'm going to pull up DraftKings. So really quick, the draft, like I was advancing 16% across all of DraftKings last night, but how I know my margins were so thin is across all of DraftKings, right? So 270 teams. I went from 15% to 11% after last night's game, which tells you how little the Lions specifically that I have. And I don't think I have a Josh Jacobs team. I guess I can look real quick. So Josh Jacobs was very, very bad for me on DraftKings.com, but I actually don't know if 0. Literally not a single Josh Jacobs team. So that game was very bad for me, but have some fun teams. I also have been really following this one super closely. Again, the Mason thing, man, like talk about tilting here down the stretch. My highest scoring team on all of DraftKings is in the 5-5-5. So that's like pretty fun. Obviously it's far ahead. It'll be just fine. And it does, it's got a quarterback and all that, but Daniels, Cousins, the aforementioned Mixon, but Singletary, Moss, not great. Chuba, fine. Algier, fine. Mason. If we got Mason onto this team with like Tank coming back and with Chuba, I'd be like, all right, in the 5, maybe this isn't winning the millie, but in the 5-5-5, I'm like, we might be cooking with something because Marv, London, Zay, McLaurin, JMO, McCaffrey sucks, but Slayton, Mechie, okay, A.T. Perry, let's ignore that one. Kyle Pitts, let's ignore that one also, but Jonnu, right? Jonnu saves Kyle Pitts to where you're feeling really good in a smaller field tournament. But again, you'll see a lot of Jordan Mason on a lot of my top scoring teams. Tons of Jordan Mason, tons of Drake London actually is on a ton of these top teams, and Tank Bigsby. So kind of where you're seeing me look is I'm tilting the shit out of Jordan Mason being hurt, but I have a ton of Tank, Drake London, those kind of guys on these teams. You do see a Garando team here, which is fun.
Yeah, those are fun. The DraftKings ones are so hard to look at because you start seeing players like, why did I draft that player? And like, oh yeah, because it's
every
20 rounds.
Yeah,
it's 20 rounds. That's why.
A.T. Perry, brother. A.T. Perry is on my top team. Not only is he not relevant, he's on the Broncos practice squad.
The only saving grace is one of those times I clicked MVS, and one of those times I clicked Jawan Jennings as well. So yeah, Though that seems like a fun team. The 555 is going to be really fun to sweat throughout the playoffs. I'm excited to watch that one with you. We'll have to keep an update on how you're doing in that throughout the off season,
Yeah, definitely.
throughout the playoff
Any
season.
any final, let's do a week 14 thought. So a what's going to and again, no Voldemort because he plays the
Yeah.
Carolina Panthers and we all know that he's going to have a huge game, but it's a weird slate, right? So it is. We never really talked about the Byemageddon part of this, but it's a huge week that's going to shake up best ball, not just because of certain matchups or whatever, but because 6 teams are on bye and so many notable teams, right, with like
Yeah.
huge fantasy impacts are on bye. Um, any like things you're specifically like this is going to be a huge deal for your advancing teams, but just like advancing teams in general?
So I want to go back to Houston because Houston is on bye. And if you look up Nico's advance rate right now in BBM,
Oh, wrong
he
page.
is he's at right at 16%. So he's going to obviously score 0 points this week, right?
Right.
And probably drop his advance rate a little bit, maybe. So I think getting Nico teams through becomes even more fun because he's not going to be a high ownership guy within these. So that's something that I'm looking at. Other than that, the one thing I'm going to say about Voldemort is I don't think he matters this week because like those
No,
teams are kind of like,
he
it is
matters
what it is.
around, right? There are going to be teams who he
Sure.
helps advance, but like like you said, he's advancing on 50% of teams already, so it goes up a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. So like that doesn't matter. So I think that we want to look at guys that are on bye this week that you can sneak in still that are fringe because I think a lot of the Collins teams are going to be fringe personally.
Great take from Clipper Nation as well, that if you are a sicko like all of us here sitting, you and I and the folks listening, and you do any correlation with the week 17 game, they're both on. The Ravens and Texans are both on bye.
Right.
So now you have two, and they were all expensive, right? Both teams were very expensive. So now you have two expensive teams play each other in week 17. You correlated them. They're on bye, and you might have Washington guys or New England guys or
Yeah.
Denver, right? You might have Cortland Sutton or whatever. It's like next thing you know, you have like a third or half of your team on bye. It's definitely going to sink a bunch of teams and keep the advance rates of like a Nico Collins much more depressed than like he probably deserves.
Yeah. So I just think that though the teams that aren't playing are the most impactful in terms of best ball this week more than anything. So that's kind of those are the numbers that I want to watch. How are these guys getting through with your Ravens guys who I think won't drop as much, but specifically guys that have been out for a little bit. Andrews could be an interesting one as well because of how he started the season versus I haven't looked up his numbers specifically,
Mm-mm.
but stuff like that is going to be real interesting to see at the end of the week going into week 15.
Definitely. I will also add, I think somebody said this in the Discord last night, and I got a chuckle, but I also thought it was like accurate, and I was rooting for it as well. The game last night started out terrible. Jordan, what did Jordan Love throw for 30 yards in the first half,
3 yards in the first quarter, which
3 yards
was
in the first? That was disgusting to watch. But like it's also like there's going to be a couple guys, like particularly Saquon has a really good matchup. Kamara has a really good matchup. Jefferson has a really good matchup. Please, God, Justin, please, just one time, one good game to help keep me afloat would be sweet. But it projects, like if you look at projections and the amount of buys as a very low scoring week. Like again, I play a lot of DFS. I work in DFS. I look at all of that stuff. Anytime you go to a week and all the like top projections, ownership projections, honestly, particularly on DraftKings, are like Aiden O'Connell is going to be very popular this week in DFS. Jacoby Myers is going to be really popular this week in DFS. Like when that stuff is happening, it's like, okay, yeah, like part of it is because they're trying to fit, the Saquons and the Kamaras of the world, but it's also like, okay, there's nothing like really that juicy, about this slate. Like people are going to play Will Levis and Aiden O'Connell and Mac Jones. And I mean, shout out Jameis, but Jameis against the Steelers is very different than Jameis against, the Ravens or whatever. So it could be one of those weeks where that's both good for teams you're trying to get through. And if a team scores a big number this week, it could really leapfrog like a bunch of teams, because I'm not sure how many fantasy points are actually going to be scored in this week, especially when we account for buys.
Yeah, I completely agree. The Aiden O'Connell thing is funny, and I know I have to beat John Daigle, who's probably running Aiden O'Connell doubles in our
I
pick six.
watched the pick six, and if anybody mentioned Aiden O'Connell again, I was gonna throw something through my screen. I get it, man. Like, trust me, I understand why, but Daigle kept, every time they were like, yeah, well, Daigle, who do you like at this position? It was another Raider. And it was just like enough with the with the Aiden O'Connell, please, God. Like, that being said, I think I'm playing Caleb Williams in DFS, so I am no better. I'm playing a first overall pick. Aiden. If Aiden O'Connell went first overall, I'm basically playing the version of that. But I'm actually kind of excited for the Bears this week.
My big thing that I need to figure out this week is I still have a $100 Survivor team alive, 20 people left for $340,000. And
what are your options?
So I can take the Bucks at home against the Raiders, which seems like the obvious pick. But now I kind of want to take the Saints on the road against the Giants.
Yeah. If Neighbors doesn't play, I think it's a huge deal. It's a big difference.
It's massive. And
do you have Bengals?
No, Bengals are gone, but I have Steelers. I don't really want to take them against Cleveland, though. I just feel like that could go poorly.
So they play. Hold on, I just want to look at their schedule to see, like, if there's something more advantageous, like next week coming for Pittsburgh.
Well, that's the Bucks. The Bucks have
cupcake
Carolina.
Schedule,
yeah, they have a great schedule coming up.
Maybe Pittsburgh. I know you don't want to take them against Cleveland, but here's the Pittsburgh schedule in the playoffs.
I know
it doesn't get worse than this. At Philly, at Baltimore, and Kansas City. Holy shit!
Yeah, I know that this is the either take them this week or never take them.
Mm-hmm.
And the other problem is weeks 16, 17, and 18. You have to take two teams every week.
Oh, you might be forced into sweating Russ against the Browns.
I know. So it's going to be up to the wire for this one for me. Not that anyone really wants to hear my Survivor takes. But.
No, I find it to be interesting. I'm sure people would love to me pull up all my eliminator teams and really just walk through how many Mike Williams. We're on the same team. I need Mike Williams. Last thing. How does this shit happen in best ball? Someone has got to explain it to me, other than the fantasy gods screwing with me. I genuinely hated Mike Williams this year. I have, like, across all sites, all formats, everything, no Mike Williams. It was not my, like, I didn't really want to invest in Aaron Rodgers all that much anyway. I still drafted Garrett Wilson, whatever, put the scarlet letter on me. I'm an idiot. But I have two remaining eliminator teams. There's 3 constant players on: Joe Mixon, Nico Collins, okay, cool, and Mike fucking Williams. How the hell is he this important to me, especially on week 14 buys? Like, I'm like, I need a Mike Williams touchdown or something somehow. But Mike Williams is a guy who I'm going to be sweating out on Sunday against the freaking Browns.
But you might actually be running hot, because isn't Austin banged up?
Calvin Austin's hurt. Yeah. So get ready to learn whoever Scotty Miller or whoever the hell Arthur Smith brought in, because it ain't Van Jefferson is definitely going to catch a touchdown. I genuinely have considered putting a Van Jefferson Millie team in on DraftKings, just to be like, I know that he's going to trigger me and, like, catch a long touchdown because I need Mike Williams.
Or they're going to have Justin Fields run some routes. Just one of those random trick plays where Russ is rolling out.
Philly special. Russ pitches it to
like,
Fields, and he throws a touchdown to Russ.
Yeah,
that's gonna
some
happen.
bullshit like that. And you're just like, come on, dude. Yeah,
They're definitely gonna throw to an offensive lineman, Darnell Washington, Van Jefferson, just to troll me.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, but we got to get out of here. If you're not in the Discord, join. Link in the description. We're going to be going Spike Week is going to be going live now that we have reached the best ball playoff. Well, we're about to reach the best ball playoffs. We're going to be going live just about every weekday on YouTube. We're going to do, I'm recording with Karain for a new Legendary Sickos on Monday. So we won't go live on Monday, but we'll be dropping a new podcast episode on Monday. It'll of course be on YouTube as well. So just about every day, be ready. We're going to cover the best ball playoffs and the best ball season and a lot of the things we talked about here today and the results of each playoff round, but also playoff best ball. My wife, by the way, gets so confused. She's like, what's the difference between best ball playoffs and playoff best ball? And I'm like, they're wildly different, but that's a legitimately genuine question. It's a great question. I'm like, I say it out loud and she's just like, what is that? Explain that again. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm really down in the weeds of this stupid stuff, but we're going to cover playoff.
And then you're clicking on your underdog tabs, your 800 ways to try to get into them to try to show her. And she's watched 90 Day Fiance and you're just like, God, I don't know what's happening anymore.
Yeah, it's painful. We did watch a Deck the Halls last night. Underrated Christmas movie. Shouts to Danny DeVito for any Danny.
Is that the Matthew Broderick one?
Yeah, Matthew Broderick is so bad in that movie that it's hilarious because Danny DeVito is so good.
My favorite thing about that movie is there was a crew member on set and Matthew Broderick was standing there at one point and he goes, "What did I do to deserve to have to do this movie?" It's like, well, you killed somebody, so that's probably what it is.
That is too good. Tyler, they won't answer. We do try to primarily focus on best ball. I would not drop Jaden Reed.
Yeah.
But you know, every situation is a little bit, if you have like 5 wide receivers that you're never going to sit, right? Like we dropped in a different league that I'm in. I forget who we dropped. That was like a good player, but it's because he will never, outside of 3 injuries, make the starting lineup. If you're really loaded at wide receiver, sure, go for it. But Jaden Reed, I know it's been bad, but I'm not dropping a player that good.
That's also the bad beat question thing where it's like, is Jaden Reed droppable? Well, how many players are in your league? Mm-hmm. What are the scoring settings? You're not giving, like we don't have enough info to ever answer those questions without knowing the full context. So yeah, is he droppable? Mostly not.
Yeah. On most teams, no, but it's possible that he is droppable on your team. But we will be back. Legendary Sickos back on Monday and be ready on Tuesday for a recap of Advance Rate. It's Advance Rate Tuesday. So we'll be covering Advance Rates, playoff matchups, projections, and everything there in between. And we'll see you guys here in a little less than a week. Peace.
Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there. You can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.